So I'm talking about the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. Um, the Turks were roundly and soundly defeated in this great sea battle, and as I've mentioned, it was the very last battle ever where galleys took place in the battle. There's a really famous painting of it, which I think is at Hampton's Court, and it just shows the sea completely covered with galleys, all in combat. Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote the Author Don Quixote, he took part in this battle, and he was wounded and he survived. An interesting touch also on this map, which I think for a map trying to function for military purposes, is the fact that dotted around the standard yeah, there, for example, a deer, another deer, there are deer dotted about all over that map. So it's a rather delightful map, and that is owned and belongs to the British Library, and they were happy for me to reproduce it for my book. Next, this is a map by Christopher Saxon, published in 1575 in the Atlas of the Counties of England and Wales. I'm often thinking about the first time something happened. And this was the first county map of Dorset ever made. It was produced to celebrate the power and the might of the great maritime nation, and Saxon is sometimes known as the father of English mapmaking. And his success was due to the patronage of Thomas Sexton. He was the master of requests to King Elizabeth I, and there's his coat of arms. If you didn't have patronage, you were doomed to failure. You had to have patronage in order to be successful. Saxon was given an open letter, and this is the wording, to see him conducted unto any tower, castle, high place, or hill to view that country, which is a clear reference to surveying by triangulation, which was a relatively new surveying technique. It was only around about the 1550s that kind of surveying technique, where you had a plane table, you went up onto a church tower, you went onto a hill, you took the angles, and then you started to do all your measurements. You could start to get really quite accurate map making going on. There's a new feature which will reappear on many of the maps. Oh, so I'm going to do this, haven't I? Here. And that is the lovely decorative title cartouches that you get on the map. They've got this lovely strap work that you can see all around there. It's lovely calligraphy, the wording is just beautifully engraved. And of course, there's the royal coat of arms above. Other features that will reappear are rivers, which are disproportionately large, molehills, as I call them, for high ground. I mean, those are hills. There's a pair of dividers. This is the first time you see that, so to indicate, how the map is drawn to get accurate distances. Written over a scale of miles. The wording there is scale of miles. You've got ships. You've got monsters somewhere. Can't see them actually, but there is a monster there somewhere. You're going to see a better monster in a bit on another map. And curiously, Dorset looked protruding like the head of a tortoise into Devon. In 1844, the boundaries were reorganised so that some of what was in Devon came into Dorset, and some of what was in Dorset, for example, that strange little bit sticking out there, that became Devon. That was in 1844, and then in the 1890s there was a further reorganisation. And of course, as you know, in the 1970s, Bournemouth and Christchurch came in from Hampshire into Dorset. But as yet there are no roads, and that's an intriguing one because that's going to last a little while, the fact that there were no roads shown on the map. This is a map with quite a different purpose. It's an estate map drawn by Ralph Creswell in 1586. The whole survey consists of a number of detailed maps, and this is the general map of the Isle of Purbeck. Ower, just there, where is it? About there, was the principal port for the export of Purbeck limestone and marble, which went all over England and Europe for things like fonts and tombstones and coffin slabs. And much of the marble went to London, for example, to Paul's Cathedral. London's debt to Purbeck was paid back in the 19th century when the Mercer's Hall, which was in London, was taken down stone by stone and rebuilt in Swanage as the facade to what is now the town hall there. So the stone went from Dorset up to London, back down to Dorset again, which is rather nice. The little inset cartouche I like because it delineates the bounds of the estate. And I'm going to just read out the quaint language that's used there. The bounds of the said island goeth and doth extend from a way lying betwixt Flowersbury and a wood called the Whitway, and from thence to Ludgerford, and from thence to Wareham Bridge, and so still from thence by the seaside toward the east to a place called Sutherland Castle, and from thence continually by the sea coast unto St Albans Chapel, and so still by the sea coast westward until you come again to the said place of Clarensbury aforesaid. Well, there's rather lovely language being used to describe the bounds of this estate. Regarding Poole, there's a document emanating from the borough, which was 5 years prior to this, in 1581, complaining how the governor of Brankside, that's Branksey, and this is the wording, how the governor of Brankside doth molest the inhabitants of the town, and will not suffer them to pass any persons from North Avon Point, but doth threaten them to shoot at them, and violently doth take their money from them, which is not only a great hindrance to poor men that were wont to gain that ways, but also an infringing of our liberties. I've no idea how that was resolved, but that's really quite an intriguing little insight into what was going on in Poole at that time. Yes, another purpose for a map. This is, well, not so much purpose, but this is intriguing because you're kind of transitional here between that bird's eye map that we saw first of all and the plan maps that we used to, that you see many of around this room. Because you've got partly relief features, for example, Ringsted Bay, you've got cliffs showing, and again, the Chesil Beach and so on down to Portland. On later plan maps, you don't show that kind of relief, you know, it's just literally a plan view of what's being featured. Now, this is the first one to have a compass on it. It's very faint, but there is a cross line like that. That's west to east and north to south. And with the wording, you've got meridians. I'm just pointing to the word meridians. That means that's the noonday sun, so that's the south. You've got the top there, the word terribly faint. I think you can see it in the book just about. But that says septentrion. That's referring to the 7 stars of the great, of the bear, of the great bear in the sky. And then you've got the word over here on the right, orient, the east, and occident, the west. And that continues to match really until for many, many years onwards from there. This map's attributed to Robert Adams. It's not certain it's by him, but it's believed to be by him. He's better known for his depictions of the Battle of the Armada in the same year, 1588, showing the Spanish and English fleets drawn up in an engagement formation off the Dorset coast, which many of you may have seen. You can go online and you can see those maps. Oops, gone too far. This is a very pretty map from Campus Britannia. It's based on Saxon's map. As you can see, it's very, very like it. And therefore, it's not surprisingly similar. And here is the first time that a proper compass rose is shown on a map. And in the bottom right-hand corner, and you see that very same type of compass rose on porcelain maps that were used by sailors back as early as the 1250s, which were maps on vellum and which were used by the sailors. And radiating out from the compass rose on those early sailors' maps are all the lines of, that you can track a course. And then we've got a bit of monster. Sailors in those times really had strong fantasies about sea creatures. I mean, quite rightly so, I think, and they were highly superstitious of what might be lurking in the depths of the ocean. And this one, I think, on the maps that I'm showing you, is perhaps the most fantastic of any that I can say. But look, we've got the dividers, scale of miles, many of the features like the molehills, the twisty rivers, all these little things that were on an earlier map, here they are shown again. But this is the first time that each county is engraved on a separate sheet in one work. And it displays a high degree of accuracy. This triangulation system of surveying is really, as I said, pretty accurate. Because if you were to take the individual maps in Campus Britannia and you were to piece them together like a jigsaw, you'd have a pretty good approximation to the actual shape of England and Wales. So it's remarkably accurate for the times in which these maps were introduced. This, of course, you'll recognise, John Seed, 1610. It's from the lovely volume Theatre of the Empire of Great Britain, which would only have been found in the great, for example, Chatsworth has got one, Longley's got These were atlases produced for the wealthy and the landed gentry and the aristocracy, really to show how well established they were, and also probably not probably, definitely to celebrate the great nature of this nation and what a great maritime power we were. In the corner up there, I think, do I do an inset of it? Yes, I do. This is the very first time, this is the first recorded map of Dorchester, which was up in the corner of the map there, surveyed by Speed himself. It says just underneath here, look, there it says scale of paces. And that means that Speed would have started at a particular, let's say at the top of High West Street, where the roundabout has. He'd have walked all the way down to the far end. He'd have walked all the way back again. He'd have taken the average of his paces, and it would have been pretty much spot on the distance that he was surveying. So when he says a scale of paces, he literally means he walked it to discover just how far it was. As I said, it's really very accurate map of Dorchester. The map also shows, for the first time, we've got coats of arms on the map. That's Bishop Osmond, who was around about 1050. You had a flowering of heraldry around about 1135 on to about later on in that century. And Bishop Osmond, prior to that, he had no coat of arms because there wasn't a system of heraldry taking place. Then you've got further Earls of Dorset. These are Earls of Dorset, some point of say so. Each of these is coat of arms of a set of Earls of Dorset. Bishop Osmond died in 1099, in fact. Another first on this map is the depiction of hundreds. So each of these lines that delineate an area. A hundred was an administrative and a legal district dating from Saxon times. It consisted of 100, why it's called 100 because it was 100 hides. And a hide was an area that would support one family. And of course, they would vary in size according to the quality of land. So if it was poor quality of land, 100 would be bigger. If it was fine quality land, then the 100 would be smaller. Hence the differing sizes of the 100. You've got an interesting there, the scale of miles, or the scale of English miles is the word that was there. And it raises an interesting question of what constitutes as mile, because there were many different scales of miles in use. The statute mile was established as 1,760 yards in 1593 by Act of Parliament, but it was only adopted really widely once the Ordnance Survey came in. So, a long time later. But it was used intermittently before then, for example, Ogilvy, I'll talk about it in the road map. But the English mile, or a local or customary mile as it's called, it ranged from 2,035 yards to 2,500 yards. And you may be interested to know that there were, this is in Europe now, there were German, Hungarian, Italian and French miles. There was a great mile of 2,430 yards, a middle mile of 2,200, a small mile of 1,830 yards, and Julien's map of France in 1751 had no less than 20 different scales of miles on it. So it did need to be organised and made more consistent. Now, at last, we get to this rather intriguing map that I keep showing you too early on a number of occasions. This is a map with quite a new purpose compared with what we have so far. It covers parts of at least 2 counties, and this is the first map to illustrate an author's poetic work. It comes from Michael Drayton's Flowery Discourse of Polyolbion. We have a fanciful and far from geographically accurate depiction of twisting rivers imbued with female personification in the form of naiads on the rivers. The sources of the rivers are small cherubs pouring water out of pitchers. And particularly impressive, I think, is the goddess on the Isle of Wight, who's bedecked with an ornate headdress. So, really, and I just love to see the wavy lines of the sea. I think that's just beautifully engraved. Here's a map by John Bill, 1626. When I sold my maps in 2017 at Duke's, well, not all of them as you see, that was the one that I was really sorry after I'd sold, because if you've got the book called Deepest Dorset, the map that's illustrated in the front of that is this map here, which was mine and no longer because it's gone to someone else. I thought, who wrote Deepest Dorset? She's a lovely journalist lady. Anyway, when I was talking to her and she was giving a talk about the book, she said, if only I'd known about your auction, she said, I'd have gone and I'd have bought it. Because, there it is. We've just looked, no doubt, many it's from the abridgment of Camden, Britannia. It's one of the clearest and rarest maps in the lecture. There was only ever one edition of this atlas in 1526, that was it. Mostly atlases went into many editions, but not that one. And there's only two names engraved on the sea, which is quite unusual. Usually you see lots of different names, both Sandsfoot Castle and Portland Castle. But it's got all the usual things, the strap work, round the cartouche, the pair of dividers, the scale of miles. And what is new on this is that it's got these longitude and latitude markings on it across the bottom and up the side, and that's the first time that occurs on this map. This map comes just 4 years after Abraham Case introduced button making to Shaftesbury from the continent, and a text from this time describes, and here's the wording: many sweet and fresh running springs forming rivers whose mouths are harbours, whereby vessels of burden discharge their rich treasures, and the sea, which with open hand distributed her gifts all along the south of its shore. Well, the rich treasures were chiefly cargoes of textiles. There was a healthy trade in woolen cloth, duck for sailors' uniforms, Holland, which was of course linen, imported from Rotterdam, and Lockgram, which was linen for furnishing and decorating from Morlaix in France. Here is a map from a direction for the English traveller, and it's the first map of Dorset to have a distance table, as one saw on road maps right up to relatively recent times, and now we all use sat-nav and Waze and things. But, within memory, and we were given maps by the AA for a journey, and you had a distance table really very like that in the corner of the map. And it takes up a substantial part of this map too, because really the county of Dorset takes pretty sort of small importance in this view here, because this goes right up to Malmesbury, up in the north. And I think that's an indication of how important the wool trade was, because wool would come down to the county, down to the coast and for export. So yes, a rather lovely. Just a little bit more about the products. In the 17th century, sailcloth was made in Bedminster and Burton Bradstock. Serge was made at Winterbourne, Sickland, and linen was made in Burton Bradstock as well, and lace was produced in Lyme Regis. Now here, this is from Johan Blau's Atlas Novus, a Dutch map maker. It's one of the most profusely decorated and most finely engraved of all Dorset maps. In fact, my publisher, David Burnett, of Dorset Press, he decided to use that cartouche there for the front cover of the book, which I think worked very successfully. And it shows bales of wool and hemp either side of the cartouche to indicate how important those products were for us in this county. There were two extremely important raw materials in Dorset's prosperity: wool for clothing, and hemp, or flax, as we can sometimes call it, for an astonishing range of products. Here's an example of things made from flax or hemp: canvas, linen, nets, oil, foodstuffs, lighting, carpet, tow, paper, clothing, twine, thread, and tools. Remarkable. The map was made at the height of the English Civil War, which was when 3,000 clubmen rose up against Cromwell. They gathered on Hamilton Hill on the 4th of August 1645, and the clubmen's banners proclaimed, "If you offer to plunder or take our cattle, be assured we will beat you battle." Cromwell brought out his dragoons, the clubmen were defeated, many were imprisoned overnight in Shrewsbury Church, and they were released only on giving their promise of no further revolt. Right, John Enderby, we've got an example of this here tonight, haven't we? You have a look at it when this talk is over, because there it is. Now this is a really groundbreaking bit of map making, this was. It's in the atlas called Britannia, and I would say this is the most important map making since Saxon's 100 years earlier, because it's the first time that roads are the prime function, using a continuously scrolling ribbon to follow a route, and with a compass rose on each of the ribbons to indicate what direction you were going in. It weighed nearly 2 kilos, the atlas did. It was unwieldy, could only be carried in a coach or possibly in the saddlebag of someone on horseback, and was definitely only a volume for the wealthy. And this is the first road atlas to use the statute mile of 1,760 yards as standard, and it's also the first on the scale of 1 inch to 1 mile. We've still not, however, seen roads on a county map, but not for much longer, as you will see in the slide after next. Now, this is a novel use for a map. This time it's a playing card, and it's the first time the county is depicted on a playing card. Now, educational cards like this one had existed from as early as 1590. Playing cards were very popular during the reign of Charles I, but many fine sets were destroyed during the Civil War. Often the educational kind survived, and this one depicts the merry monarch Charles II. There was a stroke of luck for card manufacturers, namely the number of cards in the pack conveniently equaled the 52 counties in England and Wales. The suits were divided into regions. Clubs represented the northern counties, hearts the eastern counties, diamonds the southern counties, and spades the Welsh counties. So, of course, there'd be a diamond on the Dorset one. The smallest county was number 1, through to the largest county at number 13. There's a quaint description here of Dorset, written on this map, little tiny playing card map. And you've got the next one, which is the northern, which is there, and this one is the same size. And the wording goes, it's a fertile soil full of woods and forests, store of sheep, Dorchester is a chief town, in it with ruined walls by the Danes. In it are 248 parishes and divers rivers. The diamond suit almost completely obscures the county. I mean, really, there's not much geographical accuracy in this one, is there? And the name Dorchester is engraved on the sea next to a ship. So really, I mean, that's not where Dorchester is. But this next map, and I think this is a really important, this one, which is just there. This time it's by Robert Morgan, who appears here twice tonight, physically. There's a playing card map there, and that first edition of the county down there, second one in on that table down there. And you've got on this, you've got the dividers, the scale of miles, the compass roads, and with some adjoining counties I mentioned, part of Somerset, part of Wiltshire, obviously Wiltshire. But you see, what is missing, I was explaining this, do you remember the point you are in? No, there is where there would have been stenciled the diamond, red diamond shape, but because this was a little set of playing card maps for educational purposes, the children could have been given it in a class and thought about, the council. It was said by the parliamentarians that if they had that stencil suit on, the half or the club or whatever, the Puritans very likely would have destroyed it because they wouldn't have wanted anything that could be used again. So, historically, this map comes at around the time that the infamous skinny trade began to develop in Dorset. The chronic shortage of labour on the West Indian plantations prompted Dorset merchants to include a new port of call on their way to New England. And instead of sailing directly to Jamaica and trading their woolens and silks directly to sugar and spices, they called first at Guinea in Africa and traded their goods to slaves, then traded the slaves for the products that they brought back to Lyme Regis in Jamaica. And no one in Dorset saw that second side of the triangle, the slave route, and it passed by largely unnoticed at the time. It's now called The Forgotten Trade, which is actually the title of a book that's well worth reading by an author called Nigel Tattersfield, which is all about that terrible trade. We hear much about it these days because we're trying to make reparations for the harm that we did in those days. This is, well, I think it's strange that nearly 45 years elapsed after Ogilvy's innovative strip road map that we saw earlier, before a pocket road atlas was produced. And this one is called Britannia Depictor, or Ogilvy Improved. It's here on display. It's one of those atlases just there. Please feel free to pick up any of the atlases and look through them, but obviously I'd like you to take care while you're turning the pages. But they are there to be looked at. I don't want them to be, wrapped in cotton wool and never looked at. So there they are. Do look at them. Ask them if you'd like to. Take care. Accompanying every county map like this one, and I think we've got that here tonight especially, it's just not mine, it's Ian. Accompanying each of these maps, you've got about 3 or 4 or 5 sometimes, depending on the amount that's needed for it. You've got the roads being shown, that you can follow your route in the way that you could do with the Overland map. And another feature of this atlas is that the first time, another first, is the maps are back to back on the pages. Prior to this, maps were all printed either with a blank side or that earlier map that you saw from Canada Britannia. It wasn't blank on the back. What there is this Latin text. You can tell that's the first edition back of that particular map because it's got Latin text and subsequent ones don't. But you had either text on the back or it was blank. In this atlas, the maps and the roads are literally printed back to back on the paper. Obviously to save space. Then it can fit in that little book there. You absolutely fit into a pocket of a great coat you were walking. So you suddenly got some maps which are available to a greater number of the populace and not just the wealthy. It was immensely popular, this atlas was. That's the first edition, and it went into many editions over a period of about 45 years. This map's from Chorographia Britannia, the first map of the county to show, down the left-hand side in this case, detailed margin information of local interest. It gives the number of MPs in each constituency, the number of boroughs, the market towns, parishes, and perhaps most interestingly, market days and fairs. Woodbury Hill Fair, which is mentioned on there, near Bear Regis, is listed, and it was once thought its largest annual fair. It was a model for Thomas Hardy's Green Hill Fair in Far from the Madding Crowd. It was spread over 5 days. Each day had its own speciality. The first day was Wholesale Day. The next day was Gentlefolks Day. Then came All Folks Day and Sheep Fair Day. And the final day was Pack and Penny Day, when sheep offered the race before the fair closed. For change, I decided to show you, instead of the map, the title page of the atlas. I haven't got this from you. This was one of my atlases that actually sold at the sale in 2017 reviews, so I don't have any. But that's the title page, and it's a absolutely typical mid-18th century decorative title page. In this case, it's a classical figure. That's Cleo, the muse of history, offering Britannia a copy of the Kitchen and Jeffreys Small English Atlas, i.e. this atlas, while another classical figure, leader, bearing a swan, looks on. Here inside the atlas is the map of Dorset, similar to the previous map, but this time with the local information laid out across the bottom of the map rather than down the side. This is an intriguing one because this is quite different than anything you've seen so far. It's an imaginative aerial view of the county, completely in keeping with the vogue for the picturesque and the romanticised view of nature that was prevalent in the Georgian age, typified, of course, by the landscaping of such as Lancelot Capability Brown at the great country estates, for example, Milton Abbey and Denham Palace. The view comes from George Bickham's British Monarchy, and there's a nice touch on the road there, the wording there, from the Crown in Dorchester. So we know where they're heading. What is? Yes. Yes. Click on. This is a lovely map. This is a grounded title, the Royal English Atlas, and we're seeing. No, it's not the first time, but we're seeing Emmanuel Bowen was the engraver, and Owen was the historian. But he was well known for his propensity to cram in as much information as possible into what would have been the blank areas surrounding the county, so much so that it's almost impossible to read without the aid of a magnifying glass. There is, however, a beautiful cartoon showing a boat at anchor in Weymouth Bay, and workmen engaged in the task of quarrying Portland stone. Also on the map is a vignette of, surprisingly, Bristol Cathedral. Well, the reason for that is the Bristol Diocese, which was created in the mid-16th century, took in parishes from Salisbury, Worcester, Gloucester, and Wales, and according to the contemporary antiquary and author Brown Willis, of the 250 parishes in the Bristol Diocese, 221 of those were in Dorset. So that's the reason for a picture of Bristol Cathedral on a Dorset map. Now, Isaac Taylor. Do you have a look over there? We've got an example of back in 1795, but published by Beaton, with the original edition taken separate sheets and was published in 1765. It's pivotal. I would say this is pivotal in map making history because A, it's on a scale of 1 inch to 1 mile, as you saw, Ogilvy had done the same earlier. But it shows, most interesting, I think, it shows both the medieval roads and the newly formed turnpike roads. So you've got both showing on one map. Now that's quite unusual, but around about 1750, the turnpikes came in, and you wouldn't expect normally to see medieval roads and turnpike roads all on one map. So you can actually do a comparison on the map itself. Now, what am I going to move on to? We've got Lagos Castle, of course. There are several cartouches around the edge of the map showing different things, but this is Lagos Castle here. An intriguing point on this map, I feel, is the wording, if I can find it. It says Canton 1756, just there, I think is where it says it. And that's referring to General James Wolfe, because he trained his troops. They were camped there, and he trained his troops on Hamilton Hill in order that when they got to Quebec, they'd be able to storm the heights of Abraham and be used to going up on steep-sided slopes in order to take that city. He went down in history for his success in this endeavour, but he lost his life in the process. He was only 32. And on this map again is a detail of the notoriously dangerous coast of Cheville, all the way down here. And each of these is details of a shipwreck. I'm going to home in on that one there, because the caption there reads, "Here, £30,000 of safe Alpha." This was a wreck of the Hope, which went down in 1748. Well, that scant account disguises the real nature of the event, namely that she carried £50,000 worth of gold coins, that 300 people descended on the beach, and that it took 10 days for the customs men to restore order, supported by the militia. Well, that's what they did. The record, we hear it more in Cornwall, don't we, really? But it happened here in Dorset. And incidentally, note the ornate compass rose with cherubs below the wind around the edges of the compass rose. But also we've got, next picture. This is foreshadowing the Ordnance Survey, I feel. Because here you've got a rather ornate cartouche, however, with headed characters, and of course these are pretty much what we would call now on an Ordnance Survey, like the conventional signs. So they show you windmills and farmhouses and different things like that, Beacon, water mills, it's all on there. And you can just sort of see the Ordnance Survey in the making with that on Isaac Taylor's map. Here we've got a map by John Carey, that's here tonight in one of these atlases. It's from the Traveller's Companion, and John Carey really heralded a new era of accurate surveying and high quality engraving, which was to be the hallmark of the next century, which to my mind makes his spelling error on it all the more surprising, because if you look up there, that is spelled Engaver. So the engraver has missed out the first R of the word engraver. That appeared on that first, this is the first edition of that map. I can assure you that the many editions that followed, that was rectified. So that's an absolutely surefire case of that being a first edition with the misspelling up there. Nearly all the latest turnpike roads are shown on this. Some coaching inns are also marked, for example, Woodyates Inn, where the Great Western Turnpike enters Dorset in the east, and the Pen Inn over here on. This map is, yes, you puzzled by that first idea, you put it the other way around. Why is this map like that? So it will fit on the page. Dorset, got a passage like that. Dorset where it fits like that, So they put it sideways on, which is fair enough. Intriguingly, a few years earlier, in August 1784, so really not long before this map came out, there was the first trial run of a mail coach service from Bristol to London, initiated by Thomas Palmer of Bath. It carried 4 inside passengers and an armed guard for security of the mail, It covered the distance remarkably quickly, leaving Bath at 5:20 p.m. and reaching the General Post Office in Lombard Street at 8 o'clock the following morning. And by November 1785, just 15 months later, there was a mail coach network throughout England. So that was deemed a success. Here we've got a sweet little map. Is it on display? I'm not quite sure it is or not. It might be. It's from England Delineated. It's by John Aiken. It's a delightfully simple educational atlas for use in the classroom. The small amount of detail would make it possible for a pupil in a classroom to memorise the geography of the county. Purbeck Isle looks truly insular, since Luxford Lake pretty much goes from there to the coast, and so thus making it pretty much an island, hence the wording Purbeck Isle. We've got a town plan here now. This is from Hudson City of Dorset. This town plan of Weymouth shows the newly constructed bats, as they were called, and also some bathing machines on the beach. Because you see, this was George III's favourite resort. He would come down with Queen Charlotte. He visited in 1789, but Queen Charlotte was not a favourite with the Weymouth traders. She was an economical lady who used to bring all the provisions with her from Windsor, rather than purchase them in the town. This gave rise to a rhyme concocted by the locals, and this is how it goes. Bread, cheese, salt, ketchup, vinegar and mustard, small beer and bacon, apple pie and custard, all from Windsor, greet with frugal grace, for Weymouth is a damned expensive place. The other town map that I'm showing you today is the town map of Shaftesbury, engraved by John Upjohn. He was a Shaftesbury resident with a really intimate knowledge of the town. And the double diamond footpath you can see there coming down from Abbey Walk down into St James, and opposite the two brewers. That's still there. That double diamond path is still there. And it's a remarkable. This is the first for a map of Dorset. Well, it's not a map of Dorset, it's a map of town. But it's got the height of the land shown, which is most unusual. You wouldn't expect to see that normally on a town plan, but there it is on this map. And if you want to see the plate, the copper plate that was used for printing this map, go to Shaftesbury Museum. It's there on display. This is another estate. We had Treswell's estate map earlier, and now we've got another estate map. Belonging to land belonging to a remarkable man called Thomas Hollis. He's given quite a big mention in Hutchins' History of Dorset. He was a staunch Whig and benefactor of Harvard University. He named his farms and fields according to his Republican sentiments, such as New England, Boston, Massachusetts, Avon, Revolution, William III, Settlement, and Hanover. And he named one wood Stuart, deriving anti-Jacobite satisfaction by beheading at every time he coppers it. He loved his farm at Corscombe, which interestingly, I was playing golf at the course over at West Bay just on Sunday, and I decided to come back to country, and I came through Corscombe and Horsop, where the quiet rooms used to be, and so on. And it was fascinating to me because I'd never done that before. I'd written about Corscombe in my book, but I'd never actually been there. But I was there on Sunday. He described the earth at Earlish Farm, which was his farm there, as sweet as a nosegay. He died quite suddenly in 1774 whilst giving instructions to his farm workers. He previously ordered that in the event of his death, this is his wording, my corpse to be deposited in a grave 10 feet deep, and that the field should be immediately ploughed over, that no trace of the burial place might remain. So his last wishes were carried out to the letter. No one knows the exact location of this remarkable man's remains. Now, the Ordnance Survey. There it is. Have a look at it. The Ordnance Survey began as it meant to go on, and that is with the highest standards of engraving and accuracy. It took many years to complete the full survey of the nation, intended, of course, by what's called Ordnance Survey, principally for military use, just like that first map we saw, in 15, the one commissioned by Henry VIII. It harks, and it indeed harks back to that. The first map of Kent appeared in 1801, and from the start they were folding maps, which was paper on linen, and the map of Dorset was published in 1811. And the detail shows Poole, Harbour and Purbeck here. The wording rope walk which is at Hamworthy, is a reference to the rope-making industry and a reminder of how important it was in the maritime role that Dorset played through the annals of naval history. This lovely bird's eye view is from the Imperial Guide. It tracks the mail coach road from Andover to Weymouth, all that way. And it could well have been used by George III. I can imagine George in his coach coming down to Dorset, perhaps even holding that edition of the Imperial Guide and following his way whilst looking at this that lovely, not exactly a map, is it? It's more a sort of depiction of views, isn't it? Clearly on the map, visible on the map, are Salisbury Cathedral, and what else have we got? The Church of St. Peter the Paulus in Blandford with the cupola, which was never going to be, it was going to have a spire originally when it was designed by the Bastard brothers, but the cupola was put on a contemporary measure, it's still there. And you've got Branston House and Dorchester Stone and Maiden Castle and Weymouth. This is a sweet little map, John Luffman, from the New Pocket Atlas in Geography England and Wales, a charming education atlas with a new approach to the depiction of each county in a tiny spyglass frame and a charming description below, which I'll read some of it to you now. This county enjoys a mild and wholesome air and a rich and fertile soil, and as far as Blandford, which is one extensive east, Dorset is famous for its woolen manufacture and fine beer. This map's here, the Langley and Belch map, which is over there, from Langley's New County Atlas of England and Wales. It's thoroughly up to date. It's got turnpike, it's got the mail coach roads, it's got hundreds, it's got liberties, which is another sort of administrative area owned by law, and it's got an explanation of symbols, i.e. conventional times, effectively. The atlas that map appeared in was the last to use copper plates with decorative engraving, because thereafter harder wearing steel plates were used. And of course, you could run off many copies off the steel plate. You could offer the copper plate, which then you could print gradually wore away. And the vignette view of the Esplanade at Weymouth is almost exactly like a drawing by J.M.W. Turner of the same scene from the same angle. I think I've gone past one. Yes. This is by a French cartographer who's called Aristide Michel Carreau. It's from l'Angleterre, une description historique et topographique du royaume de la Grande-Bretagne. It's perhaps one of the most decorative maps of all, swarming bricks for chanting its feet, that is a lovely touch. Below are the typical products of Dorset, a milk jug, pool bay oysters, fish, game, barley for brewing. This is one of my very favourite maps from Travels Through the Counties of England by Reuben Randall, which was a pseudonym, coming from perhaps the most charming of all the educational atlases. Rural scenes show the essence of agricultural and industrial Dorset, depicting dairy, cattle, wheat, quarry, flax, barley, and, interesting on this map, and dairy with the cheese making and so on. But also at the top there, you've got the discoveries of Mary Annie, who was the first person to find an ichthyosaur, and then later plesiosaur on the coastline ridges. This is Thomas Mole, 1850, from the English counties delineated, and it's the last of the old-style decorative maps. Mole was an expert in heraldry and antiquities. And we can see the coat of arms of the Digby family there, and also the seal of the Abbey of Abbotsbury, and I'm sure you'll recognise it, the coat of arms of the county town of Dorchester. His maps are widely available owing to their extensive republication in what was called Barclay's Dictionary. You've got a book of them as well. Oh yes, oh good. And in the corner, you've got that lovely vignette showing Holy Trinity and St James's Church up there on the hill, and a man fishing, looking in the pond. And you've got the seal of St Edward's Abbey, Shaftesbury, also just there. So that's a really beautiful map. But after that date, really maps ceased being decorative in that kind of way. And the map also shows The very first railway in Dorset, built by the Southampton and Dorchester Railway Company, opened in 1847, and there was a proposed branch coming down to Weymouth just there, which was never built, so it never took that route. For me, maps become a bit less interesting to look at by the start of the 20th century because as I said, they're less technical. So I'm showing you the cover of a cycling map instead. Railways encouraged people to travel the scenic parts of England and Wales, and in the 1880s, the safety bicycle was invented and cycling became the next craze. Folding maps for cyclists based on the Ordnance Survey was produced in huge numbers over the next 3 or 4 decades. And here we have riders dressed in Edwardian garb, and at the top are symbols for danger hills. A single feather pointing down hills that have to be ridden with caution, and a double feather for those that are being dangerous. And our final map, which is over there, a relatively recent map carrying on the tradition of decorative map making is this map of Chillock, drawn by Gillian Moores to celebrate Common Ground's Parish Map Project. Villages throughout Britain took up the challenge to, as they put it, know your place and investigate their surroundings. And the Chillock map is a masterpiece of careful draftsmanship and a tribute to the 28 parish mappers of Chillock who stuck to their task for 2 years and achieved this fine contribution to map making. Around the edges are vignette views of the village. There's a decorative cartouche taking pride of place at the lower centre. There's a traditional compass rose in the bottom right-hand corner. There are various spellings of Chillock all the way around the margin of the map. And there's a lovely touch because of the history of the village in the form of the sinuous wording to look like waves on the sea, that you can look at. It's over there. And I think it's lovely to end with a map that has picked up on so many of those features of maps that you've been seeing through this talk. And it's good to know that the inspiration of the early cartographers lives on. And thank you for your patience. Thank you for inviting me. I wish you the best in there.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for David?
I've bombarded you with
Ian.
The big map of 1764, 65, yeah. The one where you see the Purbeck stone being cut from the cartouche on the top right. And it's got Exeter Cathedral on the bottom left. Yeah. Exeter Cathedral. No, Bristol, sorry, yeah. Bristol, yeah.
Oh, that one?
Yeah. There's a marvellous description of Dorchester in there, of Dorchester products. Do you think you can scroll back to find it? It talks about Dorchester cake and Dorchester ale being the best ale.
That's all on the map.
Yeah.
You won't be able to see it on the map.
Ah, okay, yes.
Best thing, it's still, I don't know whether you'll see it in the book even.
No.
We'll follow up, we'll take a close up of that and we'll circulate
I don't know.
We'll circulate it because
I could try.
I have been
he found information on this.
Extraordinary information.
Yeah.
I've been trying to find out what this Dorchester cake was, whether it's actually Dorset cake or whether it was a variant. So anybody who knows, let me know.
Yeah, find the recipe. No, yes, interesting. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Yes, no, you really, I did, that's one of the maps of Solomon village.
Yes, that's right.
If you have it in front of you, you can read it all.
It's a huge one.
But you need pretty much do the magnifying glass.
Yeah, you do.
Can I ask, would you mind coming up and just speaking into here so everyone can hear you online? I'll repeat the question. The question was, on one of the maps from 1750, it talked about the pre-turnpike roads and then the transition to when those turnpike trusts were established. Can we see both on the same map?
You can't necessarily tell the difference on the map because it's showing both and it's just showing them as roads. However, if you're on the ground looking at today, you can go and see, for example, if you come down the A30 down towards the Sherborne Causeway, where you've got a filling station, it's an Esso station and it sells caravans and things like that. Just before you get to that, you've got a left turn to the orchards. Cherry orchard it's called, and about half a mile down there is what you can see it so clearly the original road, before the Sherborne Causeway was built, before that turnpike, in the 1750s, they were trying to build roads that could actually be travelled on safely and comfortably rather than just bumping along. And that Sherborne Causeway was built to be above the water level, so you could go back and forth, and not be troubled by flooding. But if you go down that little lane I'm talking about, the Cherry Orchard Lane, the original road that came down from Shaftesbury dips down into the valley and cuts across the little lane I'm talking about. And there, about the width of probably this, from that white to this white is the width of it. It's only this width. And so it would have been just for some small car or maybe a horse rider in traffic car. And it's just so clearly medieval road. I mean, one of the best examples I know of, there is actually another one, I think you come from Blackford down towards the road that cuts across the Dorset. And you come up onto the hill before you cut down to that road. And there's another example of a medieval. Am I being heard by these people? Yeah. So on the ground you can see very clearly, but on the map I would say possibly. I mean, let's check. I would say probably not entirely clear which would be which, but I may be wrong on that. We can look. Yes. so it's over there. We can do that in a minute. Yeah. So yes, do read Ronald Good, The Old Road to Dorset. That's where I got a lot of my information from my book. Really superbly researched. He produces a line drawing or lines of roads at the back of the book, which you can trace and then put onto an ordinary survey map and see how things match up. And you really can begin to discover where the old roads were, the medieval roads were, compared with the modern roads that we have today.
Can you describe the actual map making process? You talked about the transition from copper plates to steel plates. Were these all engraved back to front?
Yeah, yes, something I should have mentioned. All the maps you've seen being engraved with his burin. The burin is the little sort of metal tool we use to begin into the copper or with the steel. Everything in reverse. Everything in reverse. Because when it's printed, it's got to come out the right way round. So they had this incredible skill. All that calligraphy you saw has been done back to front by the engraver, and will then be printed so it comes out the correct way round.
And then all the colouring was done by hand?
Yes, colouring was done by hand, that's right. Yeah. And you can tell, interestingly, there are ways of telling whether a map is an original or, see, my speed map had been coloured by Magna Gallery in Oxford. It had been coloured by that person, by that dealer. Done very well, of course, but very bright colouring and not sort of kind of the original colouring that you see on the older map. You've got original colouring here on some of these maps. One of the real giveaways is the verdigris. The green will produce verdigris discoloration on the other side of the page. So they paint it on the green, and then over time that will seep through. So if you turn the page over, there it is, all showing green on the back. And that's verdigris discoloration. That is an absolute sure sign of original colouring and not modern colouring. But there are other that you get used to. I don't know what it is, the blues, the reds and so on, they're just a difference in the early colouring compared with modern colouring. You need to begin to be aware of it.
Yeah. Did they also sell the maps uncoloured?
Oh, well,
originally coloured, and they coloured them later on. It was the chap sending them on.
Yes, and many of the actors had great chats were they'll be uncoloured.
Yeah.
And there are two schools of opinion on it. Some people prefer their maps uncoloured because they just seem to be more original. But equally, I think if they've been coloured originally, then they're just as original, but have been coloured.
Yeah.
But you do need to check. If you're buying maps that have been coloured, you do just be sure whether you've got original colouring or modern colouring. Because many dealers, to make a plain map look more attractive, will colour them. They'll do it well, but to make a more sellable map.
I just wondered if anyone said this, I guess, it's evidence of any of the Roman roads that were
No, I don't think. No, you see, you really need to come The Ordnance Survey, of course, will start to show things like Roman roads. No, you wouldn't be seeing that on the early maps, no. But once you come to the Ordnance Survey, of course, they're mapping everything, and Roman roads will be shown. You know, and often a modern road will be following a straight course, and you can sort of tell almost instantly that it's a Roman road.
Well, where the Roman road continued to be used, it will be on it.
Yes, it will.
But you've got to know, yeah.
Yeah, but you've got to know. See, that's an interesting, for me, that's an interesting subject, because I would probably be a bit controversial with it, but I'm very interested in the Celts, you know, who preceded the Romans. They would map their landscape according to the heavens. And so, you know, you have points along lines and all this kind of thing, you know, which a lot of people poo-poo ley lines and all this. But in my view, there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever. They saw the world like that. And they built straight roads. When the Romans came, they built their straight roads in many cases, if not even most cases, on top of the existing Celtic straight roads. And if we talk about them as Roman roads, straight roads, they weren't, they were Celtic straight roads.
I know on some of the 20th century Ordnance Survey maps, there are demarcations where it says Old Roman Road. If that is now no longer a current road, that is marked on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yes, indeed, very much so. There's a sense of history about it all. That's the key.
A short question. You talked about the early maps not showing roads.
That's right. Yeah.
Kind of why? Because you would have thought what roads are going to be important.
I think because they were not when you and I say road, we're thinking of something we can drive along, you know, use conveniently. I can tell you, roads were not like that originally. They were that width at best, or might just be a little, what we call now a footpath. And you wouldn't, probably in those days, you wouldn't be you wouldn't have been seeing the importance of it. I don't know why. I mean, it's surprising. It's not until that planning part you get road shown on a map.
Could I help a little on that, please? If you look at the Chinook map,
Yeah.
you see the road moving north of the main village of Chinook. It seems to peter out, it's almost the Beaton. And essentially, it's the Catholics who like to keep out of the limelight. And I'd suggest that there was a lot of intentional formation.
You could very well be right about that. The question, I don't know if the people on Zoom picked up on this, it's the question of why the road on the Chinook map features out, and you know, and why in many cases that roads are not shown.
You've got the Hollowways up there, which
that's yes. Oh, well, sorry, I should have mentioned Hollow. There's another absolutely key way of if you come out of Milbourne Port going towards Sherborne, you've suddenly got a cutting. That's your modern turnpike road, built in around 1750. The old medieval road goes up to the left to a sort of stone gateway into Sherborne Park. That's the original, of course. Because the early roads, of course, would have just taken the contours of the land. They wouldn't have gone, you know, doing cuttings and things. It's only when you get to turnpike roads that people, you know, there's serious, you know, work going on to create a better route. Yeah. So yes, it could well have been in secrecy. I wouldn't know, but it's a good suggestion.
Summary of the question, talking about liberties versus hundreds as units of administration.
Yes, well, as I said, a liberty belonged to a lord. The question, though, is were there liberties alongside the hundreds in earlier times? And I don't think I'm going to be able to answer that question. I don't think I know the answer, and I would love it if somebody could do the research and find out what the answer is. Because I would, when I'm asked questions, I'd like to know for a future occasion what the actual answer is. But no, the liberties only start appearing on those later maps. In the earlier maps, it's just hundreds. And I see the hundreds go back to Saxon times, and there wouldn't have been liberty. It just wasn't structured like that. And the 100 being 100 hides, for a family to live on a hide and, subsist. The liberties wouldn't have been part of that structure. So but I don't know the answer. No.
When did the limiters start?
Well, that's
You don't know.
That's
Right.
a good question.
Yeah.
I've no idea. No, I don't know. No. So somebody please do a little bit of
Yeah.
research and find out.
Well, I think that's a sign of how much you have enjoyed the talk that you clapped before you were asked to. I would like to add my thanks to the speaker for really an incredibly interesting talk that will make me go back and look at my maps, the ones which were too big to bring, in a new light. Is absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed the evening. Thank you very, very much.